Welcome, Wargamers. Doug here from 2 Plus Stuff with another review of rules coming from White Dwarf 506. In my last video, we covered the Dwarven Ascendant rules, which is basically a unified Dwarven faction rules ability that combines Fire Slayers, KO, and Dispossessed. But now we're going to talk to the next set of rules that's on the very next page, featuring the Petrifex Elite for the Ossiarch Bonereapers. I really am enjoying the way that, content is being released for 4th edition. These rules seem fantastic and at least interesting. That's the most important thing, right? They have to seem interesting. The Petrifex one certainly delivers, but where the Dwarven list is interesting because of the scope of what you can take, right? All these different Caradron and Fire Slayer, Dispossessed models. The Petrifex Elite one is interesting because of how narrow and laser-like focus it really is. Instead of being introduced to a whole new big faction, it's like taking a microscope into the Bonereapers to really find out cool things about them specifically. And so today we're going to go over the lore, just a brief little thing over the Petrifex Elite. There's not a ton of information here, but then we're going to go through the rules and see what it looks like to translate that lore onto the tabletop. Starting off with the question, who the heck are the Petrifex Elite? Well, they form a rather unusual Ossiarch Bonereaper army. Remember, these are highly structured, ordered, formulaic warrior societies that exist only as a tool to propagate Nagash's will. These are his personal armies that he is building and sending out to conquer, with his ultimate, timelessly long-term goal being the complete subjugation of the realms for the powers of death, and the founding of his new city, basically the Necrotopia. That's his perfect afterlife where Nagash is always in control. Now, if you're not familiar with that character's name, Nagash is the god of undeath. He has a sick model over on the Games Workshop site. And one of the things that this article immediately points out is that in a traditional Ossiarch Bonereaper army, meaning all the other ones that Catacross leads, the military caste is supreme. Your lieges, your knight lords, whatever you want to call them, the people who prosecute the wars are always the ones at the forefront of decision making. While the Mortisans, meaning the wizards and engineers who construct the army, are really there for support and maybe some guidance if there's something like that they have a specialty in. But really they exist to enable the conquest of the warrior caste. Well, the first major distinction between the Petrifex Elite and their other, Ossiarch Bonereaper armies next to them is that the ruling body is not a room of generals or military veterans, but a council of wizards and free thinkers known as the Necrosian Cabal. And because of that change, everything is different. See, most Ossiarch Bonereaper armies want to form nice unbroken lines. Remember, they're about conquest from one end of the realms to the other. They want to own the territory, they want to fortify and secure it, setting up a tithe with any empires that are kind of looped into that kind of front line. But the Petrifex Elite instead are much more nomadic. They don't keep and hold territories like other Ossiarch Bonereapers. They don't have static lines. They move in a singular direction with overwhelming force. Okay, so lots of harvesters, wizards, elite troops, and all of that is a significant departure to how Catacross prosecutes his wars. So they have a different leadership structure as well as units that those leaders then favor. And so why are they different? Well, the answer is somewhat shrouded in mystery, of course, but we do know a little bit. What we know, or what we think we know, is that this specific Ossiarch Bonereaper army was given a mission from Nagash himself upon their awakening. Whatever that mission was, both necessitates wizards being in charge and a laser light focus on an object that is not the same as others of their kind. They have a different goal. And what's interesting is that not even Catacross knows what this mission is. He just sees the Petrifex Elite acting wildly different from the other Ossiarchs and doesn't like it. I mean, he still has authority with them. He can still, bring them into combat if need be, draw on their sources, or resources rather, but he's not like governing them. But there are a few theories as to what this mission could possibly be. Some speculate that he is constructing a giant new skeleton that's essentially going to be the host of an undead god beast. Cut to the heavy metal riff. That sounds incredible. Imagine like a bone dragon to rival that of Dracothian. Others speculate that it is basically they're hunting the foundation elements of Nagash's new Necrotopia, essentially you're going out and finding rare materials for Nagash to build his city, and it's just such a long-term plan that it looks like there's no progress happening, that could also be true. Because I had hinted at that they have a laser light-like focus on a mission. Well, what is that? Most Ossiarch Bonereaper armies will take any bone or osseous material. For them, it's all the same. The Mortisans will shape it into a form that they can use. Some might be weaker, some might be stronger, but we'll stir it all up enough and make sure that it's kind of a uniform dexterity, strength, toughness, whatever you want. And that's how they make their troops. The Petrifex Elite almost exclusively prefer to use fossilized bone, which for other, armies tends to be much more difficult to use and to manipulate into soldiers. But the Petrifex Elite use it because it makes for much stronger and resilient troops. Now you have like an ounce of stone built into these skeleton structures. If need be, of course, they will use humans or orcs in a pinch. The next closest thing, this article points out, to fossilized bone is actually the bone of Duarden, because they're just short and dense. But what we get from that little bit of information is that whatever they were told to build, whatever Nagash sent them out to get things for, requires the densest and most durable bone material ever. And it seems like they are tasked with hunting it down. All of this comes together as our lore explanation for why they are so tough and focus on elite tanky units, because they're low in number, they're nomadic, they keep the lines moving, they don't take and hold, they just go. So that'll explain a lot of the unit choices that we have, but also there is a one-page-ish, it's not even a full page if you were to write it in a Word doc, story involving the Petrifex Elite in battle, during which one of the Mortisans of this ruling cabal projects his mind or consciousness into a Gothazar harvester in order to wield it as a more efficient weapon. And this sorcerer projected, necromantic bone mech is the unique hero that we get for this Army of Renown. Now, to be honest, we never had much lore for, Bonereapers projecting their mind into their creations that I know of. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't heard of this before, but what a fantastic setup, and certainly a way to be unique amongst the other factions. Here we are on page 78 talking about the Petrifex Elite. We have, like I said, our little lore blurb story going over what makes them different. And kind of just, if you're not familiar with the characters of Nagash or his city that he wants to build, just some kind of insight into that. And here's our little one-ish page story with our Mortisan projecting his mind. And then we move into the rules on page 84. This is a Flashpoint article. If you don't know, Flashpoints are essentially meant to help you reenact a very specific event or faction or sub-faction flavor of the mortal realms that have existed in the story. So unlike the Duarden one, which that story hasn't actually existed, it's purely for rules. Of course, the Petrifex Elite have existed since Ossiarch Bonereapers launched, so they're trying to give you a way to play that in-game. Now, the way armies of renown work is when you choose to play Ossiarch Bonereapers, you can then make a second choice to play this army instead. It's going to have its own roster options and restrictions, but essentially these replace all of your Ossiarch Bonereaper army abilities. It becomes a whole unique faction unto itself, and let's start digging into it. So we'll start here. Petrifex Elite roster options. 0 to 1. The Grand Necromystic must be your general if included. You can have 0 to 1. Now I'm going to spoil this. We're going to go ahead to the Necromystic. He has a unique war scroll. What's cool about this, though, is that his war scroll is Legends, but to my knowledge... Oh no, it is Warhammer Legends Army of Renown. Okay. But to my knowledge, you don't have to include him. It's 0 to 1, which is nice, because if you want to have your all-legal collection, you can do that. But while the rules include him, let's take a look at this guy. The Grand Necromystic is a hero construct of the Petrifex Elite. Below you can find a war scroll to him to field in a Petrifex Elite army. Perhaps it will inspire a kit bash. Okay, so he is essentially a Gothazar harvester, based on his base size, points, area, that kind of thing. He has a 6-inch move, with 12 health and a 3-up save. That's fantastic for a death unit. With 5 control. I like that. Melee weapons, bludgeoning strikes, 5 attacks, 4s to hit, 2s to wound, 2 rend, and 4 damage with crit 2 hits. That's gross. That is just gross. Petrified Spine Saw, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, 2 rend, and 6 damage. That is another one. Anti-infantry plus 1 rend. Pause. Those are some great profiles for the attack. I mean, I don't know if it's like worth 320 in a vacuum, but those are some big heavy hits right there. Next is once per battle, army-wide, at the end of any turn. Battlefield enhancements. Effect. If an enemy hero or monster was destroyed by this unit's combat attacks this turn, pick one of the unit's melee weapons to be the target weapon. Roll a d3. Add the result to the attack's characteristic of the target weapon for the rest of the battle. Well, we've seen his attacks. Personally, I would add more to the bludgeoning strikes just because it seems more consistent, but I like that a lot. And over here, once per turn, army-wide in any combat phase, Crushing Bone Bolt. Pick an enemy non-monster in unit, non-monster unit from combat. Oh, in this combat with this unit, I'm sorry. Effect, roll 2d6, then your opponent must roll a dice. Inflict a number of mortal damage on the target equal to the difference between the two rolls. Not massive, but once per turn in any combat phase is pretty cool. It is Rampage ability, that's his unique monster thing. Coming down here, he's unique, monster. He's a wizard 1 with a ward of a 6-up, and has all the keywords you need to make him work in an Ossiarch Bonereaper army. The fact that he is not required is, to me, a bonus, but this is, let's be honest, this is a killer war scroll, right? The idea of going up to, even if we just with that D3 thing add 2 attacks to his bludgeoning strikes, 7, hitting on 4s, wounding on 2s, 2 rend and 4 damage. Oh. But what I like about him is that unlike Grumbrindle in the Dwarden one, he is very self-contained. He doesn't do a whole lot for the rest of the faction. He doesn't feel essential. He doesn't feel like if you're not kit bashing a Gothazar Harvester, you're missing out kind of a thing. So I appreciate that. For the rest of your roster options, so you get 0 to 1 of that character we talked about. You can also take a Mortisan Ossifector, Mortisan Soul Mason, Gothazar Harvester, the Immortus Guard, Necropolis Stalkers, Morghast Harbingers, Mortec Crawler, and you cannot include any Regiments of Renown or faction terrain, so you cannot take the Ossiarch Bonereaper tithing structure thing. Remember, they don't collect tithes the same way. But if we look at that roster, there are no basic troop units of just like 10 dudes. These are all very elite, the pinnacle of their creations as the Mortisans can do. Because the Immortus Guard are the 3-man unit, the Stalkers are the 3-man blenders, Harbingers are the 2-man unit. Like there's just low model counts all around. Which I won't lie is a very heavy restriction, but I'm interested to see how that actually works on the table. And we're going to move now into the battle traits. Remember, these replace anything that says Ossiarch Bonereaper battle trait in their core book. Constructs of Petrified Bone. This is a passive ability. Ignore the first damage point that would be allocated to each friendly Petrifex Elite unit in each phase. So depending on the kind of army that you're fighting, if they are, they do chip damage across multiple phases, a spell here, some shooting there, combats, you're chipping away at what they're able to do to you every single phase, -1 damage to the attacks that come in. That's a fantastic defense. On top of some of the fact that, for example, the Immortus Guard, fantastically defensive unit. In an era, though, where beasts can have like a damage 4 or 5 attack or something, is it really going to save things? No, but it'll kind of offset some of the chip damage that comes at you. Next is a once per battle, army-wide ability. At the end of any turn, Relentless Onslaught. Pick a friendly non-hero infantry unit that's been destroyed. Roll a dice. If the roll is lower than the number of models in the target unit, set up a replacement with half the number of models from the target unit wholly within friendly territory, wholly within 6 inches of a battlefield edge, and more than 9 inches from enemy units. That's a tough one simply because, like we talked about, these are very elite units. I mean, your most numerous dudes are going to be the Immortus Guard and the Stalkers, which have 3 guys. And you have to roll less than. It's not less than or equal to. So you have to look for a 1 or a 2. That's interesting. So you only get a unit back once per battle, a third of the time. Battle traits in the combat phase. It says any combat phase. Shattering Strike. Pick a friendly Petrifex unit that charged this turn to be the target. This target can use 2 fight abilities this phase, but the second one has a Strike Last. So that's fantastic. It does cost a command point. I just saw that up one, but I mean, you know, with the limited roster you have, getting more attacks out of each of these is not a bad idea whatsoever. I don't see that as a waste of command points at all. And the last battle trait is a once per turn, army-wide in your movement phase. It's called Ceaseless Advance. Pick a friendly Petrifex Elite unit that is in combat to be the target. For the rest of the turn, no mortal damage is inflicted when you use retreat abilities, but when the target uses a retreat ability, it must end the move closer to or in enemy territory. So what that means is you charge in and then you can retreat to go further down into enemy territory. And if you do that, if you push forward with your retreats, you won't suffer any damage, at least from the, you know, the retreating action. And I actually like that, especially when you have so few models, because if you need them to get someplace, you're essentially incentivized to use them to kind of ping pong around enemy units. It's not going to make a massive difference, but in terms of table positioning, it's quite good. Turning the page to our heroic traits and artifacts. When you choose an Army of Renown, typically you only get one option for any of these things. So the heroic trait you get is Plunderer of Parts. I like that. If any enemy models were slain by this unit's combat attacks this turn, roll a d3. On a 2-up, heal X, where X is the amount equal to the roll. Okay, I like that quite a bit. So you're going to heal 2 or 3 wounds if you're able to slice some dudes up. Fantastic for some of the heroes that we have. Although, to be perfectly honest with you, I simply don't see a lot of these, because like, your Grand Mystic, he can't take artifacts, is my understanding. You're not going to have a Mortison, Ossifactor, or Soul Mason doing a whole lot of things in combat. So, this is more of a last line of defense type thing. Never mind. For our Artifact of Power, we have Titan's Fang. Inflict D3 mortal damage on each enemy unit in combat with this unit. It's a once per battle in any combat phase. I would stack those up, and so you could try to get some healing in while also destroying everything around you. That's the only combination I can think of. You don't want to use those abilities because your heroes are not the kind to get up and fight. If you could take like a Liege Cavalos or something like that, we maybe have a different conversation, but I feel like your Mortisans are going to get punked real hard. But that's okay, because they're wizards. That's the point, which is why they have a good spell lore. Hard as Diamond. There's a casting value of 7, and this is your unlimited spell. Pick a friendly Petrifex Elite Wizard to cast this spell. Pick a friendly, visible friendly unit wholly within 12 inches of them to be the target, and then make a casting roll. Subtract 1 from rune rolls that target that unit until the start of your next turn. So that's your unlimited, highly defensive, make people be harder to be hit, and then it stacks with your faction ability of reducing incoming damage by 1 each phase. That is awesome. And that's just a it's just a general -1 to wound roll, so it affects both combat and shooting. Next is Skeletal Grasp. Casts on an 8, so again, this is a harder one. Pick a friendly Petrifex Elite Wizard to cast the spell. Pick a visible enemy unit within 12 inches of them to be the target, and make a casting roll of 2d6. If it goes off, until the start of your next turn, have the target's move characteristic, and also subtract 1 from the number of dice rolled when making charge rolls for the target to a minimum of 1. You are essentially pinning a unit in place and saying you don't get to play this round. Because you figure even like I think 6 inches is kind of the standard movement value. You bring that down to 3 inches and you can roll 1 less die when you charge. That's mean. You're functionally just telling a unit to sit out for a round. We'll get to you later. Deeply powerful, but you have to find ways to get it to be easier to cast, I'm sure. And the last spell they have is Tremors from the Entombed, and it casts on a 7. Declare, pick a Petrifex Elite Wizard, cast the spell, pick a terrain feature or faction terrain feature within 12 inches of them to be the target, and then make a casting roll of 2d6. If the target's a terrain feature, roll d3 for each unit, friendly or enemy within 3 inches of it. On a 2-up, inflict an amount of mortal damage equal to that roll. If the target is a faction terrain feature, meaning you can target your opponents, inflict 2d6 mortal damage on it. If the target is destroyed, before removing it from play, roll a d3 for each unit, friendly and enemy, within 3 inches of it, and on a 2-up, inflict an amount of damage equal to the roll. Now, in a previous life, Doug would not have thought much of this spell because you're targeting terrain. However, recently I had a chance to play the Blades of Khorne when they have that new priest that can essentially pick a unit or terrain, or an objective or terrain, and it gives everyone around there like a big buff. This is the same essential thing, except you're doing damage. Depending on the table, terrain can be a massive part of this game. So it's not a set in stone, like this is a super useful 100% of the time. It is really good, and if you have something like Wildwoods coming at you, it's fantastic for targeting because it's just a spell. You could be doing 2d6 mortal damage to their terrain round to round. I like it. I like having to force your opponent to think critically about where they put their models, like in terms of being near terrain. Is the cover worth it? Probably not against this faction, to be honest. And lastly, they have a single manifestation that they can take. They just have the Nightmare Predator, which is one of the Ossiarch Bonereaper endless spells. And you can see the rules for that. As far as I know, they don't actually include that War Scroll in here, so like the idea is that it's the exact same thing. Now I'm just going to kind of hover over this for a smidge while I kind of get my thoughts together. All in all, I like this. It rewards a very specific kind of playstyle, much more specific than other sub-factions used to do in the past. But it's trying to represent a very, again, specific type of force that exists within the lore. Wizard-led uber constructs that are really, really good and tanky. So if you just see the big guys in the Ossiarch Bonereaper army and you're like, I want that life, this is for you. And honestly, that's how I stand. I really loved the Bonereapers when they were first revealed and presented, but I was hoping that they would be on a little bit bigger bases. I didn't want the 25 mil small dudes. I wanted like big, chonky boys, and so this satisfies that need completely. It's like oops all chonk. The Necromystic is a fantastic unit. I mean, he self-buffs, he accepts all of the synergies that exist between the heroes and stuff like that, but he also is just a beefcake. No one wants to ignore a profile like this. And some other units that stand out in my head, the Immortus Guard can like tank wounds for a hero to help deliver the boss to any one of these things if you see a combination that you like. Necropolis Stalkers are always blenders. But one thing I want to note here is that they have an ability where like at the start of the turn of the combat phase, you select like a head for them to use. Basically, they can pick different fighting styles and it makes them slightly better at different things, making them basically a really good Swiss Army tool when it comes to hacking through infantry. But you have rules in here that let you attack twice, and I just wanted to throw out there as a reminder, you pick the head that your guy wears per phase. So if you do get to do that, you have to be mindful of the fact that if you choose one that's good at fighting monsters and you kill it in the first attack, your second attack can go into a unit that's not the monster, but it's just not going to be able to choose a different buff. Even though the hero is themed as a harvester, he's not a bad option, meaning just take the hero in addition to other Gothazar harvesters. I love restoring 1 or 2 horrors to a unit in my Flesh Eater Courts list, and he can do that here, which is a massive deal for these 2 and 3, strong units, where they're just individually chonky boys, but they don't have a lot of numbers. Your only hero options here are interesting. The Soul Mason is a wizard 2, which I like to see, especially when you have such a great unlimited spell. The Ossifactor, I didn't see a dramatic use for, but if you can think of something, please let me know. But friends, those are the rules for the Petrifex Elite, the newest Ossiarch Bonereaper army to sweep the mortal realms. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. If you are a Bonereapers player, let me know. I know that it's a very slim roster of very elite units. It's going to be a small army relative to other Bonereaper forces, but still, it sounds very intriguing. I mean, it sounds like they set you up to have just a small army of just blenders walking across the board. And I'd love to see it on the tabletop. So, friends, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and let me know if you're interested in this kind of content. I don't normally get these white dwarves because they're just kind of hard for me to locate. But if it's something that people are interested in for rules reviews and just general discussion, I will make it an effort to get a subscription back up and running and get these in regularly. So, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.